Peter Bone, Conservative MP, is with us. Steven Woolfe, UKIP MEP and spokesperson on migration. Tom Brake is a Lib Dem MP, and David Hanson, Shadow Labour MP, is joining us as well. We'll hopefully talk to him as well later. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Peter, I'm going to start with you. Is it time now, when you look at numbers like this coming through, for the Conservatives, for David Cameron, to drop this number of tens of thousands, this target of tens of thousands in the future?
No, I mean, immigration is the #1 issue in the country, and certainly in my area by a long way. I mean, we do something in my constituency called a listening survey. Regularly, we find out what's worrying people. 10 years ago, immigration didn't feature. Now, by almost a country mile, it's the #1 issue. And what we have to do is deal with the issue, and the figures today are, well, deeply disappointing is an understatement. It's just not acceptable, and we have to look at a way to deal with the problem.
What so many people are going to be thinking, Stephen, is why has there been no comprehensive, cohesive policy throughout the governments to tackle this number effectively? Because it just seems simply that nothing's working.
Well, I think the reason why we've reached borderless Britain, and that's clear where we are, whether it's in terms of those people coming into the country legally or whether those illegally, is because you have to look at a number of key points. During the Labour Party's years, they psychologically didn't think that immigration was an issue. There's the quotes that they wanted to go out into the European Union and bring in as many people as they possibly could because they wanted to negotiate good deals with Poland in the EU. There was also those arguments that they wanted to bring people in because we've got a population that's getting older without thinking about the consequences. Secondly, infrastructure at that time within government, whether it's the ONS figures that were being looked at, weren't practically in place. We didn't have a system to count people in and out. And even if you look at these numbers today...
There is a system now, though, isn't there?
They've put one in place now. And
the number's still rising now. That's the issue.
But there is going to be a lag with anything that you do. But remember, these numbers that we're looking at today, the 630,000 people that come in, the net figures of 330,000, are based on passenger information. These are not based on systems where you can actually physically count people coming in and out properly. And that was a second problem that they have. And until they get both of those places, the psychological issue, the philosophical issue of what sort of immigration do we want into this country, which is a big debate that we need to have, and then the systems, these numbers will continue to lead us into borderless Britain.
Borderless Britain, let me pick up with that with David Hanson as well. David, was the Labour Party ever serious, or did it ever have a way of avoiding borderless Britain?
Well, I believe in strong borders, Nega, and we're trying to put in place that if we were the government today. But the key thing today is that the Prime Minister promised no ifs, no buts on this. He made a pledge to the British people, and he's self-evidently not met his own target. And in not meeting his target, he has both not tackled the issues of serious exploitation, which is happening in the UK today, nor has he dealt with the issue where we have potentially people who could come to the UK to help us grow our economy, and particularly the issue of students. So I think he needs to revisit this target completely and look at how we work for the interests of the UK economy to help us grow our economy.
The reason I asked you if the Labour Party was ever serious is I'm just looking at the figures. When the Labour Party came into power in 1997, the net migration number was 48,000. By 2010, it was 256,000. What responsibility do you hold for that?
Well, we were part of a wider Europe, and we still are, Nega, and part of that was the widening of Europe into the Eastern Bloc. And I think most people will accept that Eastern European involvement in the European community has been good for business across the whole of the UK and across the European Union as a whole. And also, if we look back to the days when I was in my youth, when we had a Berlin Wall and where we had Eastern European frozen out of the wider Europe, that's part of our challenges. Now, what we need to do is deal with that, and there are issues to do with exploitation, there are issues to do with free movement, and we need to look at how those operate. But ultimately, a wider Europe is good for Britain.
OK, so the numbers perhaps not a problem. Tom, people have complained about it. They're disappointed with the last coalition's actions on migration. Your thoughts?
Well, I think trust is fundamental to this, this whole story. I think some people will always be opposed to any immigration, but I think most people, what they're actually worried about is people who are cheating the system, and that's why the Liberal Democrats, we were very keen on ensuring that we reinstated the exit checks, which are now in place, so we've got a clear picture not only of who is coming into the country, but also who is leaving the country, or indeed who is not leaving the country, so the government can then take action. But I think the government, the new government, have repeated the mistake that the Prime Minister made in the previous, in the coalition government, where he stated on behalf of the Conservative Party, not on behalf of the then coalition government, that he would reduce immigration to the tens of thousands. That was not achievable. And what we've seen, of course, in the latest figures...
What did the Lib Dems say
is
to that one?
Even in relation to the non-EU immigrants, that there is hundreds of thousands of people who are coming in. So that's an area where the government can control things, and yet he's not going to be able to achieve the tens of thousands. But in terms of immigration, I think one thing that certainly the Liberal Democrats, we are very keen on stressing, is that actually immigration is a positive for the country, that the contribution immigrants make to this country is outstanding. We've heard from the earlier piece that actually, if you look at the contribution that immigrants are making, they're paying more into the tax system. They're probably not taking out as much from the NHS as has been stated.
Okay.
And that's something that we need to remember in these arguments.
Well, I think Tom is right to say that immigration has actually had a contribution to society, but what I think we've always done is lump this all together into one. The studies last year, for example, from the CREAM, the UCL report, that said, you know, we had 20 billion positive to the GDP in terms of EU migrants, but they ignored the fact that in their own annex, Annex 4 and 5, they said overall in the same period, the cost to the British economy was between 98 and 158 billion pounds, far outstripping that. And what we've had also in studies now is to show, from Mark Carney, as the Bank of England has actually recognised, we've not only had job displacement, we've had wage compression in this country, and also, in addition, we've now had further studies that show if you look at highly skilled workers, then they are going to contribute more, and they come from the United States and Germany. So the proper debate should be able to say, not lump it in, as Tom is saying, that all immigration has created a positive effect, but actually look at the immigration where it has had a positive and negative, and then put the systems in place to deal with
And
that.
there are arguments about the quality of immigrants coming through and how they contribute to the economy. Absolutely. OK. Tom, when you heard David Cameron say that we need to get the figure back to tens of thousands, you said is that it was unachievable. You knew that at the time. What's an acceptable number? We're at 330,000 net migration.
Well, I don't think I'm not going to plug a figure out of the air, because I don't think it's possible to do that.
But there must be a figure that's acceptable, you think.
The Liberal Democrats, we believe that the UK is stronger as part of the European Union, and therefore the ability that the UK has to, because of the freedom of movement within the EU, that's a figure that can't be controlled. So I'm not going to pluck a figure out of the air.
It's not plucking a figure there. I'm presuming you've done your research on this as well. And I'm going to ask the same question to all of you, that you've looked at the numbers and you've thought, OK, tens of thousands was unrealistic, 330,000 is causing discontinuation, at the very least, as a mild way of putting it, deeply disappointing, some people are saying. You must have thought of what would be an acceptable politically and economically figure.
Well, I think what does need to happen from a political point of view is that the government, the services need to respond to the pressures that are created by immigration, because it's very clear that there are certain parts of the country where there have been a significant number of arrivals where, because the infrastructure isn't put in place in terms of schools and hospitals, that is creating pressure in the system. So that is something the government needs to be able to respond to quickly. OK,
you're not going to give me a figure. Fine. Peter, would you give me a figure? Because the 330,000 deeply disappointing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a complete failure. I mean, you're absolutely right.
By Tory MP.
I mean, it is a complete, but nobody's going to argue. The Prime Minister would say that. But the problem is how you deal with it. And the only possible way you can deal with this is take back control of your borders. And the reason Tom can't put a figure on it, and he won't put a figure on it, is because from the EU, anyone can come in.
That's what I said, Peter.
No, I'm saying, I mean, that's Tom's view, and it's, you know, it's his principal view on. My view is we should control immigration, have the same right to control immigration from the EU as you do from the rest of the world. And then it would be up to the government of the day to decide what the number is. At the moment, we just cannot do it, because everyone from the EU has the right to come over here. And that's what's annoying so many people in Middle England, in my part of the world, is the fact we can't control it. And that's why the EU referendum that we're going to have in a renegotiation. Now, the Prime Minister has indicated he's going to do something in the renegotiation about free movement. If they ended free movement, then I think the British people might vote to stay in the EU. But if they don't end free movement, I think people will come out of the EU and then automatically will control the borders.
David Hanson, I'm going to ask you, as the party in opposition, would you have a figure that could be acceptable?
Well, for example, Nick, I'd make some changes, certainly. For example, I would take students out of any net migration target. There are hundreds of thousands of students who are currently counted in the net migration target, who come to the UK, who go to our universities, who pay fees, who spend money in cities and communities across the UK, who leave the UK with great visions of what the UK has done for them, and yet they're included in the net migration target. That is completely madness. Now, well, why is that? I mean, if the students were out the net migration target, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. We need to look at what is in the interest of the UK economy. That means strong borders, it means tackling exploitation, and it means ensuring that we have people who come to the UK who are contributing from outside of the UK. That means students and businesses.
Taking the students out, would you have a figure, David?
Well, if we took the students out, we'd have a positive outflow of UK citizens, because at the moment there's 600, 700,000 students in the UK from abroad. And those people would not be in the net migration target if we just tweaked it in that simple way.
Stephen, the final word.
Well, I think David should look at the figures again. We've had actually those emigrating are a lot less this year, and we also got to increase those in asylum and family reunion. Peter is correct that in this negotiation, that David Cameron has to argue that freedom of movement has to stop. If he fails to do that, that's a failure of the renegotiation principle, because the public in this country won't accept it. For a moment, Tom, if I can, because then, if you do so, you can have a fair and equitable principle on visas, which treats non-EU citizens exactly the same as my black American grandfather should be treated equally as my Irish grandmother being able to come here.
Well, what would Stephen do if 1.5 million people...
I'm going to allow Stephen to finish. 1 moment. I'm going to allow Stephen to finish, and I will give you your right of reply,
What
Tom.
happens to 1.4 million people in the EU?
Look, I can answer that, but then it comes down to the 4 key categories of people that comes here. Firstly, in terms of work, we would have 0 immigration for low-skilled workers for a period of 5 years. You can control that, and then you'd have some rebalancing. We'd increase the number of highly skilled to 50,000, because that's what business needs. It's more than the 22,000 that you get under the current government. Yes, I agree to an extent with David that in terms of students, we should take them out of the numbers, but we have to be very careful with Peter's point. A large number of them don't go. And then point that you can't take out, it's very difficult, because we have international responsibilities. It's difficult to deal with the asylum seekers and family reunion. But we suspect that those numbers would start reducing towards the 25,000 figure to 30,000 a year. Those are numbers that we could get.
I'm so sorry, time is against us, as you are well aware. You're all very aware of coming on and talking to us, to the media. Thank you so much for your time. Peter, Stephen, Tom and David, thank you very much for your time.